ask you real quick, go back to, not on the screen, just to go back to your testimony. Tasha Claire was what time of day?
I believe it was 12. It was 12:41 a.m.
What time was 12:41 a.m.? Michelle Jonchuck recounts this conversation at 3 a.m.
Correct.
You mentioned that you also had text messages from Mr. Jonchuck to his uncle. Is there do you know off the top of your head what time those were?
Well, I checked the police report, and at least the first text message was at 7:05 a.m. So it was a little out of order. It doesn't change the fact that he's going from one mood, very, very dramatic mood swings, but the text started coming at 7:05 a.m.
A.m.
Yes.
Up at 12:40, up at 3 a.m., up at 7 a.m.?
Correct.
And when we stopped, we were talking about Melody Dishman.
Yes. So law enforcement also spoke with Melody Dishman and said that John had told her on the 6th, it was both phone calls and text messages. So these messages, it's not clear what was phone calls and what was text messages, but it was communication that the two of them had together. And she said that John told her that she was a parish of God, that she was the Pope, that she had to walk on water. Again, this was through calls and texts. He also communicated that he wanted to kill Melody because she was possessed by a demon. And she reported that he was claiming that he was God and wanted to kill Melody because she was a demon. Now,
It was all one day?
it's all one day.
So she goes from a parish of God to the Pope to being a demon?
Yes. And so we have delusions, we have grandiose delusions, we have paranoid delusions. But there was also something else that was significant in the deposition. In the police report, she made the statement that if he ever, John Jr. told her that if he ever did anything to get into big trouble,
Just be asked to be allowed to finish the statement that he was making.
Yes, he was responding to your question.
Please repeat the question.
I believe the question was, Melody went from God to the Pope to being a demon all in one day?
Yes.
So I understand that was the
I
question.
understand, move on.
All right, your next slide, Doctor, involves who?
This was a conversation on January 7th at 10 o'clock between Jonchuck Jr. and his attorney Torres, and this was in her office.
All right, and what happened?
What she reported, first of all, was that John arrived at the office wearing pajamas, which she deemed to be quite bizarre, and this would go under grossly disorganized behavior. He made a comment about Ms. Torres just coming back from Babylon. I think she had been on vacation, but certainly not from Babylon, and so she thought this was quite odd.
That's a delusion?
I don't know if it's a delusion or whether it's just disorganized thinking. He said when Phoebe touched the Bible, he's talking to her about this Swedish Bible, that she would start chanting or speaking in tongues. And this would be auditory hallucinations. He insisted that she, Ms. Torres, was Saint Genevieve. He was insisting that this is who she was. And she said she wasn't Saint Genevieve. When she said that she wasn't Saint Genevieve, then he said, then you must be God. Then she said she wasn't God. So then he said, well, then he was God.
So in that one, it went from her being Saint Genevieve to God to him being God?
Yes.
All in the same conversation?
Yes. So we have delusions, and we have delusions that she is the saint and God, and delusions that he is God. She reported that he asked her several times to read the Swedish Bible that he brought. She has an accent, and so that was an indication that he thought that she could read the Swedish Bible, and she said she could not read it. But then he went on to say it wasn't just because she had an accent, it was because that she is the creator, and so she speaks all languages. He became frustrated with her, saying when she said that she could not read the Swedish Bible, and said it just didn't make sense. She is the creator, she speaks all languages, it doesn't make sense that she can't read this Bible. And he was acting despondent or sad, as well as strange. He wanted her to file a paternity suit against Phoebe's mother. He told her not to file the paperwork because it doesn't matter anymore, or none of this is going to matter anymore, which scared her. He asked to leave Phoebe with her while he went to see the pastor, which she thought, too, was quite odd. So we have a lot of delusional thinking at that point. He then goes to see Father Swengros at the St. Paul's Catholic Church. This is approximately around 11:20 a.m. And Father Swengros reported that John claimed to be the Pope. Grandiose delusion. John wanted to have an exorcism performed on him because he told him he was possessed. So here we have more paranoid delusions, and now he's talking about an exorcism.
Where did that information come from?
That was from Father Swinggross. It was in police reports.
Okay.
It was either police reports or his deposition, I'm not positive, but it was from him. He wanted to get baptized immediately, and we're going to see in other slides, there's this real focus on getting baptized. And I asked him about that, and he said that he thought by getting baptized, not only would that take care of the demons, but that it also would take care of the voices that he was hearing. And he wasn't able to get baptized immediately. He was told that there's a whole process. You have to go through studies and learning, and you can't just get baptized immediately. He also noted that John was all over the place and having difficulty focusing. And this is symptomatic of the disorganized thinking. He can't keep his train of thought. His thoughts are all over the place. Having very distracted, can't focus. He also reported that John expressed paranoia, that everybody was out to get him. And this would be a delusion. And what he stated was, it was obvious that John had some mental issues. Attorney Torres was so concerned about John's behavior that when he left, she called 911. She called the police, and she was able to tell him where he was going to be. And so officers Halbert, Calabero, and Rizzo interviewed John while he was at the church.
Did you review their reports?
Yes.
Carry on.
He reported that God spoke to him and gave him newfound clarity in his life, and they noted too that he's carrying around his Bible. Again, wherever he's going, he's carrying around this Bible. He reported that his lawyer was God because she decides what happens and does not happen in his custody case, which isn't true. That would be the judge. He also reported that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder several years back and was told by a USF doctor that he didn't have the disorder. That's not the way bipolar disorder works. You don't have it one day and not have it the other day. Bipolar disorder is a very, very severe disorder. At times you might be in a manic episode. At times you can be in a depressive episode. At times you may not have any significant symptoms, but you always have the disorder. So that didn't make sense. He told him that he was not upset by the custody dispute and that he thinks he will win without his lawyer's assistance. So he's talking about the custody case. He's talking about now he thinks he can do it by himself, which I would believe is a grandiose delusion. And they indicated that they did not see any indication of alcohol or drug involvement, intoxication. At 12 o'clock, he goes to St. Lawrence Catholic Church and he meets with Reverend Cesar Patella. And Reverend Patella reported that John was worried about the devil, that he could see the devil everywhere. That would be a visual hallucination. He worried about what was happening in the world. Reverend Patella told John that he should go back to his doctor who prescribed him his medications, appearing to see that John was experiencing some severe mental disorders at the time. He referred John to another church. to go back for a second. I asked John about this visit, and he talked about how he was talking to Reverend Patella about exorcisms, and Reverend Patella gave him that wasn't something he did, and he gave him a phone number of another church to call up to get more information about exorcism. John said he called that number, but nobody responded. So at 1 o'clock, he goes back to Father Swingrove's at St. Paul's Catholic Church, and again reported that he wanted to be baptized right away, but was more agitated and more insistent about being baptized. And again, from what John told me, this was a way to get the demons away. His stepmother, Mickey Jonchuck, reported that she went with John to the priest, that John wanted her to go to see the priest because he wanted to prove to the priest that she was still alive. There had been no indication from the records that I reviewed that there was any doubt that she was alive, but he wanted to prove that she was.
Is that disorganized?
Disorganized thinking, yes. At around 2 o'clock, he has contact with Valerie Mallory at a different church, the Lake Magdalene Church, and she reported that John said to her that he was related to the Pope. She also noted that he was carrying around this large brown Bible. He was rambling about God. So here we have that disorganized thinking that speaks, that rambling is a type of disorganized, you see the disorganized thinking. And he wanted to be baptized immediately. He is going to all these different churches to find some place to get baptized.
And this is all occurring on the day of January 7th.
Yes.
What happens next on January 7th?
The next record that I have is approximately 6:30 to 8 o'clock. Apparently he went home after that last church visit and went home. At approximately 6:30, Michelle Jonchuck comes over to his father's and his stepmother's to pick up Phoebe. Apparently, after the time that John said that I'm going to fuck up your life and that you're taking my daughter away from him, they had phone conversations and they agreed for her to come over and pick up Phoebe. Michelle Jonchuck noted that Phoebe has this gold chain with a big cross around her neck. And this was a cross that John had received when he was 8 years old. She noted that he had been sleeping and the Bible was underneath his pillow. He was sleeping, I believe, on the sofa. And when it was time to go, Phoebe indicated that she wanted to stay with John.
Okay, so Michelle comes to pick up Phoebe, and this is arranged through phone calls between John and Michelle?
Yes.
And that arrangement is made some 6 hours before Phoebe's death?
Yes.
And it was Phoebe that didn't want to go?
Yes. According to Michelle Jonchuck. So, a little after Michelle Jonchuck leaves, John Jonchuck writes an email to Genevieve Torres, his attorney, saying, "My mom will be by to drop off the last $100 before you all close. LOL, ha ha. Thanks for everything, and we are a part of St. Paul's now." So again, there's that inappropriate laughter, that disorganized behavior.
So at 8:27 p.m., he says, "We'll drop off the last $100 before you all close?"
Yes.
So,
They were already closed.
and he says he's part of the St. Paul's now.
Yes.
Neither one of those are true, are they? Didn't St. Paul's refuse to baptize him?
Well, they refused, and he didn't join from my knowledge. Between 9 and 9:30 p.m. of January 7th, he has contact with Nomi Bresnahan. He sent her text messages with scripture, biblical scripture, and she indicated this wasn't like him. He wasn't a very religious person, and this was out of the norm for her, for what she knows of John and her experience with John.
Did she describe her relationship with John?
They were friends.
Been a relationship type of friends or just friends?
Just friends. They were never in a relationship.
What's the next thing he tells you?
So after texting her these messages, he goes to her home and is texting her outside the home that they were meant to be together for the rest of their lives. And was just noted that was odd because they had never had that type of close relationship. They were just friends. At 10:27 the same night, he emails attorney Genevieve Torres, "I will be there in the morning to give you the last $100. We'll be there, thanks, at 9:30 a.m.
So this is different than just 2 hours earlier.
It was different in 2 hours because he had first talked about his mother bringing over the $100.
That before she closed.
After she closed.
After she closed,
Yes.
but he says before you close.
Right,
Now he says he's bringing it over, but he's bringing it over the next day, right?
next day.
Okay. What's that? Just one of these. Or is it any of these, that email?
Well, again, there's some disorganization there. He's changing his mind. First his mother is bringing, then he's bringing. It's not, that in and of itself is not particularly psychotic, although there is some disorganization there.
No check.
No check. He then, at around 10:30, calls up his mother and asks her to come over to pick up Phoebe. And Michelle says that due to Phoebe being asleep and it being cold and windy, for John to take her to school, and then she would pick Phoebe up from school. So he went from before, a couple of days before, where he was saying some nasty things to his mother about taking Phoebe and that he's going to do horrible things to her. Now they seem to be getting along. He's fine with his mother taking care of Phoebe.
Do we have a time for the contact with Noemi?
It was between 9 and 9:30.
All right, and then, so then an hour later, according to Michelle Jonchuck, she's talking to him on the phone and Phoebe's already asleep.
So the next record we have is at 11:55 p.m. of January 7th. And in this we see the PT Cruiser running a red light, John driving very erratically. Let's see if this works. Yep.
Just press it once. There you go.
Okay. So I think what is important to make a comment about is just because somebody is psychotic doesn't mean they can't take care of themselves generally. It doesn't mean they can't drive a car. Doesn't mean that they can't feed themselves, bathe themselves. But I think this is a good example where John is driving a car, but in a grossly disorganized way. He's running red lights, he's speeding through red lights, he's acting very erratic. It's not where somebody is just drooling and not able to do anything. They can go through the motions. What is distorted, what is disturbed is the thinking, the irrational, illogical thinking, the psychotic thinking. And then we come to 12:07 on January 8th, 2015. And we have reports from Officer Vickers. And he reports that a car passed him going approximately 100 miles an hour, driving recklessly.
And that is at 12:07.
12:07.
That video you just showed us was 11:55
Correct.
in Tampa.
Yes.
So this is 12:07 south of St. Pete.
Yes. It was on 275 in St. Pete.
South St. Pete.
South. And it's important to keep in mind, Officer Vickers was in a marked patrol car, and John sped right past this patrol car and almost causes an accident, not only with Officer Vickers in his patrol car, but also with another car. He's driving very recklessly, speeding, and not paying attention to what's in front of him. Most people, if they see a marked police car, is not going to go speeding past that police car. Grossly disorganized, yes. Officer Vickers follows him at a distance, and he noted that the car applied brakes heavily near the Pinellas Bayway exit, creating this large cloud of smoke. And then the car takes off again, but not at 100 miles an hour, at an appropriate speed. And he continues to follow the car at a distance and is getting ready to pull over John. He does not have his lights on at this time, and he notices that the car pulls over into the emergency lane of the Dick Meisner Bridge. John exited the driver's side door. He noted that John was wearing a sweatshirt and red and yellow pajamas, so very inappropriate dress for a cold and windy night. Grossly disorganized behavior. He notes that as John is walking, coming out of the car, he's holding this large book. That large book was that Swedish Bible. Officer Vickers reported that he had his gun in a low ready position and ordered John back into his vehicle. The way that Officer Vickers reported it was that he pulled behind John, and there was between a car and a car and a half distance between their two vehicles. And John walks in between the vehicles, so quite close to Officer Vickers, ignoring the order to get back into his car. At this point, John yells, "You have no free will." I asked John what he meant by that, and what he reported was he did not know. He took Phoebe from the rear seat of the car, lifted her over the wall, and released her. The way that he reported, he had her and dropped her over the side. When I asked John about it, he reported that he held Phoebe by her foot when he dropped her, which does not go along with the reports of Officer Vickers. John gets back into the car, reportedly by Officer Vickers in a calm manner, and proceeds on. In addition to there being discrepancies of how Phoebe was dropped, there's also discrepancies in what happens after he gets back in the car. According to officer reports, John proceeds across the Skyway Bridge. He goes north on 75. Police interact with him. He makes a U-turn, travels south on 75 in the northbound lanes. In asking John, he has a very, very vague memory of what happened afterwards. He said he sort of remembers going towards the bridge, but being blocked off. And so turning, making a U-turn and heading back towards where he dropped Phoebe, which just doesn't go with many of the officer reports. So he has a very distorted recall of what occurred, not only during but also afterwards. The next thing that happens is he's stopped by police, and he's dragged through the window, and he goes into the patrol car where he speaks with Sergeant Hubble. And the interactions with Sergeant Hubble are quite bizarre. She asked him his name, and he replied, "My name is God, and you shall address me as such. Terry, I command you to take me to the city of Babylon now."
Is that the first time we've heard about Babylon that day?
No, he had also mentioned that to Attorney Torres. And just to go back a moment, in talking about being on the bridge with Phoebe, he reported that he could not recall what exactly he was thinking at that time. He had been having these thoughts about possession, that he and Phoebe were possessed, that both of them needed to die in order to save the world. He also talked about having thoughts that the Ice Age was coming and that he needed to travel south in order to avoid the Ice Age. So all of that delusional. On top of the bridge, he also talked about that he thought he was God at that time. So here he's saying to Sergeant Hubble, "My name is God, and you shall address me as such, and I command you to take me to the city of Babylon." He also referred to himself, to Sergeant Hubble, as the fallen angel Michael. It was noted that he was making incoherent statements the entirety of my conversation with him, and here's where we got disorganized thinking, disorganized speech. To the point, what he is saying cannot be made out the words in which he is saying it. It's gotten that disorganized. And during this whole time, he's asking for his Bible. The Bible seemed to be the most important thing to him. Other officers corroborated what Sergeant Hubble reported, that John was screaming that he wanted, not just saying that he wanted his Bible, he's screaming that he wanted his Bible. Officer Kuiman said that he was making incoherent statements. So it wasn't just Sergeant Hubble reporting these things, but also other officers. No statements were made regarding Phoebe. John was then taken to the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, where he was spoken to by a detective, Detective Huff. And I'm just going to play a few very quick clips from this time in the interview room.
I need somebody to obviously help me because I think that there's something bigger going on. Like, that's beyond me, beyond everything, you know?
So at this point, he seems to be in between reality and not reality. He realizes that something's wrong. He's not really sure what is wrong, but he knows something is wrong.
Will you bring me my Bible?
He says, will you bring me my Bible? So even at this point, he is focused, stuck on this Bible of his, the importance of this Bible.
Like, it's almost like I'm not being weird. It's like, this is like a conspiracy. I went looking for answers. I've always had problems growing up, like wondering who I was and how and what my purpose was. And ever since yesterday and a couple days before,
like what? The problems, how do you think you're different?
well, it's like, I don't know, like when I went to the church,
What church?
St. Paul's Catholic Church, and I spoke to Father Bill. He told me that I wasn't going to be ready this Easter, but next Easter, and that I was the Pope. That Francis or whatever is not like,
He's not the real Pope?
yes. And my grandma's name, and I do have Greek heritage, believe it or not. My grandma's maiden name is Vladimir. And it's always been weird, and I've had people coming up to me recently and asking me what my name is, and I've only been able to say John. Prior to this, weeks prior to this, and they would ask me what my last name is, and I would just say John.
Well, you just physically couldn't say your last name, or
It just-
Jonchuck, or it's just John?
It was just John for some reason, and it's like I really had to kind of think about it for a minute.
And that's just been going on this past week?
Yeah.
How about the Island Crew? You like working there? You said it's a Jamaican restaurant?
I kind of felt uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable? How so? I mean, it's a job.
How do you know all this stuff?
I mean, you told me when I was asking you what your name was and you said that you worked at Island Crew and that it was a Jamaican restaurant, or it was like a cafe, is how you put it.
There is a great deal in this clip. There are signs of paranoia when he talks about, people are looking at me strange. There's the signs of grandiosity where he talks again about being Pope. You can also see the distracted thinking, the disorganized thinking and speech where he's going from topic to topic to topic, to talking about his grandmother, to talking about not being able to say his name, and it's all very, very disorganized. And I think another thing which you can see in the video is he's just been pulled out of the window of his PT Cruiser. Yet there's very little expression on his face. This would go along with negative symptoms. You would expect somebody in this type of situation to have more or show more emotion.
Like, everybody just kept staring at me when I was doing a hell of a job, but
He was at his job at Island Crew for a day, and he's talking about people looking at him funny. clear sign paranoia.
Is Phoebe okay?
Phoebe? Who's that?
Phoebe was my daughter. Phoebe J. Jonchuck. Is she okay?
At this point, it's time in the interview room. I don't have the direct timestamp, but it had been quite a while. He seems at this point to have some type of appreciation that something has happened to his daughter. He asks how she is, but he also speaks about her in the past tense. And then he is taken by Officer Carter to the Pinellas County Jail, and during that trip he makes some odd and bizarre statements. He reported that he dropped Phoebe into the water and did not throw her. Like this made a distinction. For some reason, it was important for him to make this distinction to Officer Carter that Phoebe was dropped rather than was thrown. But it doesn't make rational sense. And I don't think I used these words before, but when we're talking about psychosis, we're talking about somebody who's not in touch with reality, somebody who is having delusions, somebody who is having hallucinations. They are not in touch with the reality before them. He noted that John didn't appear upset or remorseful. Again, the negative symptoms, he's not showing any emotion at all. It's a very flat demeanor, a very non-expressive demeanor.
Okay.
He told Officer Carter.
He stated that you don't know what I've been going through.
What's that indicate to you?
Well, what it indicates is, to me, it was very reflective of what he was saying to Detective Huff. He's been going from church to church to church. It's possible that it also indicates that he's been going through everything that he's been talking about with other people as far as demonic possession and all of that. Don't really know, but he's certainly talking about there's a lot going on in his life.
Now, do you have two more examples from Officer Carter of delusions?
Well, he also asked John he wanted to know what he did wrong. And asking what he did wrong, apparently did not know the wrongfulness of, or at least a strong indicator that he didn't know the wrongfulness of his behaviors.
Now that's important. Then we're going to get to that soon, aren't we? The wrongfulness of
Absolutely.
All right. What are the next two things he told us?
He also said to Officer Carter he wanted to be taken to Babylon.
So that particular delusion has occurred 3 times now in this 24-hour, less
Well,
than
that
24-hour period.
religious preoccupation, this focus of Babylon, of going to Babylon, not only is there that delusional, disorganized thinking, but also, too, it's out of touch with reality, especially for what he just did, that he's going to be taken somewhere besides jail, that the officer is just going to take him to Babylon, which is an irrational type of statement.
Or he may ask to be taken to,
Tampa Airport. He also asked Officer Carter to take him to the airport. Like, with what he just did, it would be okay to be taking to that Officer Carter would just drive him to the airport. Another indicator that he's not aware of the wrongfulness of what he just did.
Can I quick coach?
Yes.
were you able to review a court appearance that Mr. Jonchuck made on January 8th?
Yes.
All right, and this is the same day he's arrested, correct?
Yes.
What did Mr. Jonchuck say on that day?
Well, he was speaking to the judge, and John expressed that he didn't want an attorney, that he wanted to leave things in the hands of God. And so, continued religious preoccupation and delusions that, well, let's go with religious preoccupation. After the judge promoted the idea of an attorney, John initially agreed, but said only if the attorney is pure and good and not evil. He then reverted to not wanting an attorney and expressing that he wanted the matter left in the hands of God.
All right, and then, so then that is that was a court appearance, you said, where he's talking to a judge.
He's talking to the judge, and he's saying that has very mixed feelings about having an attorney and feels he'll be better served in the hands of God.
All right, and then, so then now that you have, as part of your evaluation, also observed some of his records while he was in the Pinellas County Jail?
In doing an insanity evaluation, it's very important to look at the individual's behaviors and statements before, as much as you can get at the time, as well as what their behaviors and statements are right after. Did it end right after the offense, or is it a disorder that just keeps going on and on and on? And so it's important to review what one can in regards to the mental status, the mental state of the individual as soon after the offense. And so we're able to review Pinellas County Jail records. This is the record itself. And in this record, some of the comments included, when he was asked if he knows why he's in jail, he replied, "Because I killed my daughter. And the reason why I killed her is because I am impotent." And so here, there seems to be some realization of what he did. The reason, though, is so distorted and disorganized. It's so out of touch with reality. Also in this note, he says, "I want to redeem myself. My real name is John the Baptist. Even the name given to me was Jonchuck." So we continue with these grandiose delusions. Now he's John the Baptist. He's God, he's the fallen angel Michael, he's John the Baptist. And also this religious preoccupation. Everything is circled around some aspect of religion, demons, God. Another note that day, was it? This is at 5:16 p.m. Okay, so this is also in the same note. It was written that initially he denied previous psych contact and later said, "I don't need to take any psych meds. They do not work for me. I just need God." So he's, in this statement, he's downplaying his psychological issues and focusing in on what will cure him, what will be important to him is God. God is what he needs. Dr. Hernandez, who wrote this note, diagnosed John with psychosis NOS. NOS means not otherwise specified. And this was back in the last edition of the DSM-4TR. Now they don't have an NOS. But what it was a catch-all. It was basically stating, this guy is psychotic, he has psychosis, I'm just not sure what specific diagnosis of psychosis he is. So he's just giving him a general psychotic type of diagnosis.
And he was able to make that diagnosis 16 hours after Mr. Jonchuck's in jail, or very soon after he gets to jail?
Less than, yes.
Okay.
The RO means rule out, so he's considering, maybe the specific kind of psychosis that he's experiencing is chronic paranoid schizophrenia. Dr. Hernandez also noted that John's speech was irrelevant at times, His affect was labile, the judgment very poor, insight poor, thought content reveals paranoia. So the speech is irrelevant, goes back to the disorganized thinking. Here, doesn't have that flat affect. Now his demeanor is all over the place. So an example would be somebody who displays anger and then is laughing and then have no emotion. That's a labile affect. And it's clear, judgment poor, insight poor, content reveals paranoia, which would be delusional. The next record, I'm not showing you every record that there was, just showing you highlights. The next record that I have is January 14th at 7 p.m. And what was in this note was patient remains showing unpredictable, disorganized behavior, singing at times. So and that's clear, disorganized behavior. It's written right there. Next note, January 17th.
These are from the jail.
This is from the jail. All of these records are from the jail. He denies that he is thinking about suicide. He's stating the reason he would want to remain alive was for my child. And we'll see this when I get into notes from the state hospital. John seems to vacillate, go back and forth between acknowledging that Phoebe is dead to denying that he is dead, or not accepting or not realizing that she is dead. When asked how many children he had, he replied just one. Just the one. A note from the 18th, January 18th. A flat, odd effect. So here he has no expression, although it reports that he smiled and laughed inappropriately. Disorganized behavior throughout the session. So actually it sounds more of a labile mood. He stated that he no longer felt like talking to the chaplain and said, think this is beyond that, don't you? I mean, I went to a church to search for answers, and that's when all this happened. I spoke to Father Bill, and he tried to take my Bible. It was my stepmother's. She told me she thought I needed it more than her, so I wouldn't give it to him. Continually focused on this Bible, and the thinking processes are disorganized. January 18th, there's the note he then shared. This is the same note, actually. He then shared that some guy came into his room last night and told him he was a mermaid. And he proceeded to giggle and talk to himself while this writer was seeing other inmates. So it's sort of like the experience that I had when I saw him. He was mumbling to himself, talking to himself.
So is this a delusion or a hallucination or both?
Well, the idea that the mermaid would be possibly a hallucination, possibly a delusion. It was not specific as whether he says that it would be more of a delusion. He says he didn't see the mermaid. Giggling and talking to himself. Again, that can be indicative of responding to internal stimuli, or responding to voices. He was noted to be hyperactive. The speech was pressured, so he's having the racing thoughts, and it's coming out in pressured speech. His expression, his affect is inappropriate. Reasoning, impulse control, judgment, insight, all poor. Thought processes, tangential, circumstantial, concrete. So again, the disorganized thinking and speech. It was also noted that he's having auditory and visual hallucinations. The thought content reveals paranoia and delusions. And so the symptoms that he was experiencing prior to the death of Phoebe, he's experiencing weeks after. Record on the 23rd says that he remains on suicidal risk status and is very paranoid, delusional. states he's been refusing his blood pressure medications and believed it is not the meds for blood pressure, but something else. And what he believed was the jail staff was trying to harm him, and relates to the paranoia that is also indicated in this note. On January 30th, this was the same day that I saw him, he was diagnosed with rule-out schizoaffective disorder. So schizoaffective disorder is a combination of psychotic symptoms and either bipolar symptoms or depressive symptoms. It's not clearly stated in the record, but it is a combination of the psychotic symptoms and some type of mood disorder. On February 3rd, the note is, he told the deputy, "I do not like you because you are Deputy Huff, the one who shot my kid." So first of all, Deputy Huff works in Manatee. He was not in the jail. And then he has an understanding that his daughter was harmed, but she wasn't harmed by a gunshot. So again, very disorganized thinking. He remains unpredictable, disorganized behavior. From the jail, Mr. Jonchuck went to the state hospital. The name of the state hospital that he went to was the North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center. And while at the state hospital, the symptoms continued. They reported that he was experiencing delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, disorganized thinking, thought reading, that he was able to read other people's minds, thought broadcasting, that people could read his minds or know what he was thinking. He was agitated, depressed, anxious. He expressed suicidal ideation. And what they also indicated in their notes is that he vacillates, he changes between the acknowledgement that Phoebe died and denying that she died.
So they see, this is at the intake?
It was through many, many different, there were numerous records that I reviewed from the state hospital, so I just sort of summarized them.
All right, so what they see mimics what we see on this board.
What was seen before Phoebe's death and at the time of, and you see it afterwards as well.
You learn anything else from the North Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center?
That's a pretty broad summary of the records that I reviewed from there. Oh, also, the diagnosis that they gave him at the state hospital, they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. They diagnosed him with schizoaffective disorder of both types, the depressive type and the bipolar type. So the diagnosis changed a little bit over time, but it's very, very similar. In all three of these disorders, he's experiencing these psychotic symptoms. With the schizoaffective disorder, they're also throwing in a mood component, where they also see bipolar symptoms or they see depressive symptoms. But in all three of these diagnoses, they're very similar. He has those psychotic symptoms.
And that's the mood component that you had talked about in your diagnosis?
Yes, and the thing is that from my review, I did not evaluate him prior to the death of Phoebe. So I'm doing my diagnosis through the records that I'm reviewing and the reports that I am reviewing and my interview with him. And so I'm making a diagnosis what he was at the time. At the time, I saw him experiencing psychotic symptoms while he was experiencing manic episodes. What the schizoaffective disorder is, that he experiences psychotic symptoms, not necessarily, not during, at times, while he has a mood disorder. He has psychotic symptoms separate from a mood disorder. At this point, I would diagnose him with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type 2, because he has shown that since being in the state hospital. It's in the DSM-5, it even indicates that it's difficult to make that discrimination between or that differential diagnosis between bipolar disorder with psychotic features versus schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, because they all have the same symptoms. It's just the timing of the symptoms. And in fact, they note in the manual that individuals often go from bipolar disorder with psychotic features to schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, and vice versa. They have prescribed him numerous medications. Haldol, Seroquel, clonazepam, Neurontin, Wellbutrin, Vesperil, Klonopin, Ativan, and Cogentin. These medications are to address psychotic symptoms, bipolar symptoms, anxiety symptoms, depressive symptoms, and Cogentin is to help with the side effects of these medications.
Doctor, you have now told us, as far as, well, let me jump now to a question for you, and you have, I believe your next slide is a blank slide, correct?
Correct.
Right. You did an evaluation to offer an opinion in court as to whether Mr. Jonchuck was not guilty by reason of insanity. Have you formed that opinion?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That he was insane at the time of the offense.
What we've talked about so far, for the most part, is what part of that two-prong analysis?
Well, first of all, that the first prong is that he has a mental disorder, and he has a very severe mental disorder. He has a mental disorder that causes him to be out of touch with reality.
I'd now like you to talk to us about the second part of your opinion, which allows you to form the opinion of not guilty by reason of insanity. Can you tell us what that part of your opinion is?
That he did not know the wrongfulness of his behaviors.
Do you have any slides that document your opinion as to that?
Yes.
Show those to us, please.
As we've gone along, I've mentioned some of these things which indicate that he did not know the wrongfulness of his act. I'll highlight them. First of all, he was experiencing hallucinations and delusions at the time. He was out of touch with reality. He was experiencing very psychotic symptoms. And some of these symptoms included that the world was coming to an end. He had hallucinations and delusions of him and Phoebe being possessed by demons.
Now, this one here, did you get this from, this is not just John telling you this, other people told you this, correct?
Correct. He had the irrational belief that he and Phoebe had to die in order to save the world. These were all the thoughts that he was experiencing that night, as well as he had the hallucinations about the demons for at least a week. He had the hallucinations and delusions about the world coming to an end and that he and Phoebe had to die around the time of the act. His behaviors also demonstrated that he lacked the awareness of the wrongfulness. Officer Vickers reported that dropping Phoebe and leaving the scene was done in a calm manner. He didn't race off. He wasn't trying to escape. Officer Vickers, in a very quick fashion, speeding away, Officer Vickers said, calmly away. He also reported he had no expression at the time. He didn't show expression that he was angry. He wasn't showing any emotion at all, going back to the negative symptoms.
At this time with Officer Vickers, you, I think, mentioned this. Officer Vickers testified that he was out of his car with his gun drawn,
Yes.
ordering Mr. Jonchuck to do something.
Yep.
And were the lights flashing, the police lights?
At that point, they were.
And Mr. Jonchuck is refusing the orders of an armed police officer?
Yes. Detective Huff said that John was calm and emotionless and didn't act as someone who had thrown a child off a bridge. So doesn't appear to have the outward appearance of this traumatic event having occurred and him having caused this traumatic event. Sergeant Lamb said, I never saw any kind of reaction that would, never saw any kind of reaction that would show any kind of remorse going on at that point other than that he wanted the Bible. So he wasn't showing remorse. The only thing that he was showing emotion about was for his Bible at that time.
So at this time, the only thing he's concerned about is the Bible.
Yes. And as noted before, according to Officer Carter, he wanted to be taken to the Tampa airport, appearing not to understand or appreciate the traumatic nature of what just happened. Officer Carter also reported that he dropped her in the water and did not throw her again. That made some type of distinction.
John said that. In other words, John thought it made a difference.
Yes. Officer Carter said he never appeared upset. He said that, you don't know what I've been through. He wanted to know what he did wrong. Again, apparently not knowing what he did wrong. He had no emotion, just a stare, very flat affect. No angry expression at all.
Doctor, I want to focus on this statement right here for a moment. He wanted to know what he did wrong. Is that something that Officer Carter says that John said to Officer Carter, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that important in making your opinion?
Yes. He's very overtly inquiring. He obviously knows he's in trouble, but he doesn't know what he did that was wrong. And what was just brought up was the act was committed steps away from a law enforcement officer with a gun drawn. There's an expression of the policeman at the elbow test. And what it asks is, hypothetically, given the mental state of an individual, would they have committed this crime if a policeman was right by their side, right by their elbow? If they did, that would be an indication either they did not appreciate what they were doing, they did not understand the consequences of their actions, or they did not know the wrongfulness of their behaviors. And John didn't have a police officer right by him. He had an officer right in front of him with a gun drawn, which is clearly an indication that he wasn't aware of the wrongfulness of his actions.
Doctor, is that the end of your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
You could, and I know you want to, you could have a seat for a moment. If I could have a moment.
information we had some issues. The legal problems and, are you?
Yeah, let's.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
We'll be in recess.
All rise.